Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040, and today I am going to be taking a trip down memory lane as I'll be discussing a classic show from the 1990s, Biker Mice from Mars, which came out in 1993, 30 years ago, and I'll be talking about the success and failures of the 1993 series and the 2006 run. And this is dedicated to one of my good buddies and a fellow geeker, birthday girl herself, the lovely and very awesome sauce, Vanessa Chan. So, Biker Mice from Mars came out in 1993, almost 30 years ago. And it's interesting because this came out on the back of the success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or in some countries, as it's referred to as Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. And for me, Biker Mice from Mars had some similarities to the Turtles shows. For starters, you had essentially a family as a team, and they always had a human ally. So the Turtles had April O'Neil, who was a reporter for Channel 6, and for the Biker Mice, you had three brothers from another planet, but they also had a human ally as well. Charlene Charlie Davidson, who was kind of like a tomboy in some ways, and she was like a mechanic, and she had her own garage called The Last Chance in Chicago. And she was like the complete opposite to April O'Neil. Whereas April O'Neil was kind of like Lois Lane in some ways, like the damsel in distress, trying to look for the story and always getting kidnapped. With Charlie, on the other hand, she was headstrong, not afraid to get her hands dirty, and she could more than hold her own on the battlefield with the boys. So that's what separated Biker Mice and Ninja Turtles in terms of their human allies. Now, in terms of the main characters, you had Throttle, who was the leader. He was kind of like very level headed, very calm, very laid back, and very cool and smooth talking. And then you had Modo. He was like the big powerhouse with the robotic arm and the eye patch, and he was an absolute badass and a real mountain of a guy. And then you had Vinny, who was always the thrill seeker, a self proclaimed lady killer, and he was always cracking jokes. And what made Biker Mice very unique was, as I said, you had three guys, all had their own personality, all had their own character, but they all worked very well together. And as I said, that's what separated Biker Mice from the Turtles. Obviously, one thing that the Turtles had that Biker Mice didn't have was they had Master Splinter to keep the guys in line. I suppose, in a way, you could kind of say Charlie was the one who kept the boys in line. She was always bossing them around and not afraid to speak her mind when it was needed. So there were a lot of similarities between Biker Mice and the Turtles. I first became aware of the Turtles back in the 90s when the show used to come on Channel 4, and I was immediately hooked. It was a great show, a lot of fun, and there was a lot of other shows like that coming out at the time. You know, as I said, Biker Mice was one of them, SWAT Cats, and Street Sharks and T Rex. So you had a number of these different shows coming out. But I always thought that Biker Mice was quite a unique show compared to the Turtles because whereas the Turtles' origin story, they had radioactive waste dumped on them and they essentially grew really big. With the Biker Mice, on the other hand, they came from another planet, Mars, of course, and they were in the middle of a war. And they loved motorsports, hence why they drive motorcycles. And they escaped from their planet and crash landed in Chicago, and the rest is history, really. So they hid out in a garage with Charlie, and that was it, really. We was off to the races from there, and it was a fantastic show. And their rogues gallery was quite unique. They had a very colourful and interesting set of villains. You had Lawrence Limburger, who was like the main enemy of the biker mice. He came from the planet Plutarch, and he had a very weird fascination for crime of the 1930s. And I suppose, in a way, you could kind of look at him as like the show's kingpin. Very big, liked to be in control, liked to throw his weight around, no pun intended. But he wasn't really human. Underneath his human disguise, he looked kind of like a fish, like a giant fish in a business suit, and he used to wear this rubber skin to disguise himself. And I thought Limburger was a really good villain, and he gave these guys a lot of trouble. And then we also had Dr. Benjamin Boris Zachary Carbuncle. Wow, bit of a mouthful there. He was like essentially the mad scientist, and he used to work for Limburger's superior Dominic T. Stilton until Limburger took over. And Carbuncle's job was to create machines and robots to fight the biker mice, and he would always show up every week trying to give grief to these guys. And it's interesting because his origin story was tied to Modo. You know, he had a hand in making his bionic arm and eye. So it's interesting that one of the biker mice members would have a connection to one of the bad guys. So that was quite interesting. And another villain that is one I always remember the most was Evil Eye Weevil. Evil Eye Weevil was kind of like, how should I put it? He was kind of like a punk. He was kind of like this evil punk Martian, and he had the power to hypnotize people. And I remember one episode he hypnotized the biker mice to fight each other. So I always remember that one a lot. And he kind of like looked a bit like an evil Elvis, like an evil Elvis Presley, you know, with a big mullet hair and things like that. And to me, he stood out the most. Whenever I think of the villains from Biker Mice from Mars, Evil Eye Weevil was always the one I remember the most. We had other villains like Exterminator, who was like a bounty hunter. We had Electromag, who is like an electromagnet villain. We had Tunnel Rat. You also had the Pukes of Hazard, who were like the henchmen for Evil Eyed Weevil. We had Kuroda Cody, who was like an eye patch wearing villain who was working with Limburger on the oil refineries. We had Monsterella and Gorgonzola. They were like a reptilian humanoid duo. Weathermeister, who could control the weather. Uh, we had Stonecutter, Jet Blaster, Pulverizer, who was like a cyborg. You know, you had quite a number of unique villains on the show, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I thought Biker Mice was a fantastic show. And other characters that we had on the show who didn't really get talked about that much. We also had General Carbine, who was like the leader of the freedom fighters during the war on Mars, and she had a relationship with Throttle. We also had Haley, who was the nurse for the freedom fighters, and she was involved in a love triangle with Vinny and Stoker, and she played a part in creating a faceplate for Vinny due to the injuries he sustained, and you would see her get referenced quite a bit in the show, and she would be brought back in the 2006 series in a much larger role. So overall, I thought the 90s run, which lasted for 3 seasons from 1993 to 1996, was absolutely fantastic. I even remember having a figure of Modo. Unfortunately, I didn't have any others, but still remember Biker Mice whenever I think of classic cartoons from the 1990s. Biker Mice is usually one of the first things that always comes to mind. Now, the show would be brought back in 2006 for 1 season, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't really have a lot of fond memories of the 2006 revival. For starters, the animation looked really weird. It just didn't look as cool as the original. I thought the original animation looked a lot better. And as I said, the show only lasted for 1 season, which was a total of 28 episodes. Charlie looked really weird. They gave her a haircut, and yeah, I just didn't like it that much. I mean, I never actually sat down and watched the entire show, but what I remembered of it, it wasn't that good. Sorry to say. Um, I may go back and check the show out again. Maybe there were some things that I missed out on that weren't as bad as I remembered. But when I saw the pictures for the 2006 revival series, I just thought to myself, good God, looks absolutely hideous. And it's a lot worse than I remembered. But, it's a big difference because the original series from the 90s lasted 3 seasons and it was very successful. The 2006 revival lasted 1 season and that was it. I did hear about Ryan Reynolds is looking to try and reboot the series, so we'll have to see what he's going to come up with, but hopefully it will be a lot better than the 2006 revival because that show was absolutely poor beyond words. So, in terms of the success and failures of Biker Mice from Mars, 1993 series versus the 2006 run, I'm going to say that the 90s show was a complete success, very enjoyable, and the 2006 revival was a complete utter failure. There. Can't put it any plainer than that. I am at some point going to do a rewatch of the original series, and I might even try and get it on DVD at some point because I liked it. I thought Biker Mice was a great show. The 2006 run, I might check out some clips, but I probably won't be buying the modern revival because, as I said, it was just completely poor beyond words. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on Biker Mice from Mars? Did you enjoy it? Which show did you enjoy more, the 90s series or the 2006 revival? Who were your favourite characters from Biker Mice? Did you like Throttle, Modo, or Vinny? Who was your favourite villain, Limburger or Evil Eye Weevil? What was your thoughts on Charlie? Do you think she was a great counterpoint to the Turtles' April O'Neil? And which version of Charlie did you prefer? The original 90s version or the 2006 version? And would you like to see it be brought back and rebooted? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening, and a special shout out and happy birthday to my fellow geeker buddy, the lovely Vanessa Chan. Happy birthday, bud.